on election day and just before election day. And then on election day, new ones formed up and they started heading north. And a couple things happened. Number one is you have to remember that the Mexican government has deployed thousands of troops for a year now to round up immigrants from our border, the northern part of their country on our border, and to ship them down there and hold them behind militarized roadblocks for most of the last year. That's why the numbers of illegal crossings have kind of declined for just the campaign season. The Democrats did not want lots of traffic coming over the border while Donald Trump was on the campaign trail saying, look at all the people coming across. Mm-hmm. So they cut a deal with Mexico to eliminate that. So much for the need to have a big piece of Senate legislation, bipartisan legislation to stop it. All they needed to do was cut a deal with Mexico all along. They finally did it when it served their political purposes. But nevertheless, there were hundreds of thousands of immigrants that were trapped down there behind this thing during the campaign. Now the campaign's over, nearing an end, and the caravans want to test whether that military operation is going to continue. Are the Mexicans going to keep it going, or are they done? We did our job. Sorry, our candidate didn't get elected, but we're done. So the caravans were meant to test that. Are they going to block us? Are they going to let us through? What's going to happen? So as near as I can tell, the Mexican roadblocks and operations have held, but not for the reason that anybody would think, because what happened was out of the blue. I had written stories saying they're coming. The Mexicans are not going to keep doing the military thing. They're done. They met their obligation. But Trump in Raleigh, North Carolina on Monday night before the day before the election threatened the Mexicans. If you let anybody through, I'm going to put 25% trade tariffs on you. And if anybody else, when I'm in office, if anybody else comes in, if you're still letting them in, it's going to be 50%. And if they're still letting them in, it's going to be 75%. And then 100% of tariffs on 100% of all Mexican products. In other words, the Mexican economy would be left in a smoking pile of ruin if you let this through. So now we're seeing evidence of these caravans being broken up or breaking up on their own because they know the Mexicans are going to return them back to Tapachula.
Do you think
under that trade?
okay, do you think any of them are returning to their countries of origin on their own without coercion?
I don't know. But I think that they probably will, especially the Central Americans, because they do understand. The one thing I was in Tapachula for about a week in mid October, and I interviewed or late October, and I interviewed a bunch of them, and all of them, the top thing on their mind is, if we don't get in before the election, or at least before Trump gets into office, he's going to close the border on us. We're not going to ever get in. And some of them were already thinking, well, even if we did get in, he's going to do massive deportations. So we're in trouble either way. So
Right.
I think that there's a kind of a big, now that he's won, there's a big demoralization, like the air is going out of the balloon kind of thing. I do expect that a lot of people that were planning to come will stay home and see what happens, at least for the short term. And a lot of the ones that are already there are going to either go home or keep trying their luck, and maybe they'll be missed. Maybe they'll get through the Mexicans. Maybe the Trump people won't really deport people. Maybe they're just hoping that there'll be a break. So you have a little bit of a mix, but either way, I expect the numbers to just really, really fall sharply once he's in office. No matter what, the numbers are going to fall when he's in office.
That's a good thing.
That's a good thing because the country is staggering under the unfunded burden of millions and millions of foreign nationals in the cities that have been giving them money and paying for their housing and all the rest of this. Nobody wants to keep paying.
Right. There are plenty of Americans that need help. We don't have to give out billions of dollars to foreigners to come here. We've got plenty of our own people that need help.
Well, we are doing that. So,
It needs to stop. I'd like to move to another topic that I found very interesting. You sent out a newsletter talking about the deportation under the Biden and Harris administration. That was already happening, but it was okay because it was Biden and Harris. But now, because Trump wants to deport people, it's a horrible thing, and the media is having a complete meltdown over it. But you've got a different take on it, and you've got video footage to back that up. So let's talk about that.
Brownsville, Texas, too. These 3 idling chartered buses are filled with migrant women and children from Guatemala. Plainclothes U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers in unmarked trucks open the restricted gate and lead the buses onto the tarmac. And to an unmarked chartered World Atlantic Airlines jet paid for by the U.S. government. The agents direct the migrants out and into the passenger jet, up the walkway. At least 150 migrants here. They are all being deported by air to Guatemala City under a September 2021 agreement between the two nations. Many observers of the mass migration border crisis might have assumed the Biden administration was allowing migrant women and children to stay in America after illegally crossing the border. That was certainly the case for the administration's first 6 months, and continues at some level. But that's not strictly what's happening anymore. So what is happening here? And what's the significance to the most voluminous mass migration crisis in recorded U.S. history? What you are seeing here is only a small part of what appears to be a very significant air repatriation operation that Biden and his supporters criticized and scuttled as cruel and inhumane when Donald Trump was doing it. This jet will return to Texas and pick up load after load after load, 3, 4, and even 6 times a week. All of these migrants only a short time earlier had illegally crossed the nearby southern border. On news that President Biden was giving legal papers to almost any family with children and shepherding them into the American interior to live and work just as they had hoped. This practice spurred the mass migration of families to historic heights. But in July 2021, after 6 months of sharp escalation, the numbers hit all-time highs of 200,000 plus apprehensions per month. Political polls showed that the mass migration crisis at the southern border was becoming a serious political liability, only a year ahead of the midterm elections. Whether by coincidence or plan to get control of this politically debilitating number, the very next month the Biden administration turned to Trump's highly deterring air repatriation solution.
yeah, it's a little bit of a complicated story. It really is. Because, we all know for a fact, the name of my book is Overrun. So we all know for a fact that the Biden-Harris administration pretty much opened its borders to anybody and everyone who could get there and let them into the country. But to then say that, well, they were also doing big deportation operations kind of like muddles it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I said in my column yesterday, that, hey, the Biden-Harris administration has been deporting pretty large numbers of immigrant families for 3+ years at the same time that they were letting everybody in. The reason I brought it up at all is because we're seeing the Trump plan for the greatest mass deportation program in American history, as he called it, take form and start to draw, really collaborative Democratic opposition, getting ready for war, information warfare against this operation. You're going to see that from this point forward, horrible stories about, with, immigrants being rounded up and children crying and all that kind of stuff. And being put into detention. And then, they call them concentration camps already. And they're already likening this thing to like the Nazi Holocaust. And you're going to just see a lot of that. and the press is just all over the deportation story and everything else. The reason I brought up the Biden Harris deportations is because they've already been doing this exact thing. It's a smaller scale for since, as far as I can tell, August of 2021. The administration did, the current one did round up family units and put them forcibly on jet airplanes and did fly them all the way back to Central American countries, Guatemala, Salvador, Honduras, and they even did a bunch to Africa and India. And they have been doing deportations already of family units of exactly the same that the Trump administration is talking about doing. But nobody cares that they're doing it. There was no publicity. My guess is that you didn't know about it, and probably nobody that is listening to us right now knew anything about this, but it happened and still is happening even now. It's not happening for the same reasons that the incoming Trump administration is going to do it, for deterrence, for to reverse damage mainly. But as I write in this article and in my book, the 2022 midterms were coming up back then, and they were getting a lot of bad publicity over all the hundreds of thousands of people that were pouring in. A lot of them were Guatemalans and Hondurans, and they were like there was a fight within the White House between like these liberal progressives that wanted completely unfettered open borders and pragmatists who were like, hey, we've got a big election coming up, man. We got to do something. And what happened is that the president let both of them do what they wanted at the same time. That's why it's confusing. They didn't stop the liberal progressives from letting everybody in at the border, but they also let the political pragmatists mount these deportation flights at the same time. So it was just, that's why it's complicated, because
That's the part.
they had a big
That's the
fight.
part.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
They
That's the
had a big
part that
fight
made no
within
sense.
the
Yeah,
right,
it made no sense. They were doing just the opposite thing, both
right.
of them coming from the White House, and I'm like, how can that be? But it was.
That's right. And they've deported about that way about 576,000 foreign nationals, and the majority of them were children and women and families. And I saw it myself. I filmed it. That's what's in the piece. I reported on it. I said this is happening. It's confusing because they're letting everybody in over here, but flying these guys home over there
Right.
secretly, and there was never any press about it. And all I'm saying is, where's the press now? They're still going to be doing this. They're doing it right now.
The
Exactly what
people,
Trump people are saying that they're going to do. It's just hypocrisy. It's the height of hypocrisy, and anybody who wants to complain about what the Trump administration is going to be doing has to complain about this too. Like, where were you when this has started going on back in August? How come it was okay to not even write about it in the newspapers that it was happening? These are women and children that were ripped from all the whole thing has been happening by the Biden administration. So they never really stopped it. The reason for them doing it changed a little bit, but they're still doing it. And they were picking nationalities whose numbers crossing illegally were really high, like Guatemalans for a while back in 2021. They were the big number. And then Venezuelans became a big number. So they were like, okay, we're going to start deporting Venezuelans and Guatemalans. And it worked actually, because you can see when they started the flights that the number of Guatemalans that were entering illegally fell by 60%, that kind of thing. They knew that they were targeted. The deportations really work as long as you're doing them, and
so
that you're not also letting them in at the same time. Like, you might deport one but let 20 in, and if you're Guatemalan, you're like, those are pretty good odds, I'm going to keep
right.
trying. That's what
But
happened. That's why it sounds
when
complicated.
when they selected who they were going to deport, they picked them prior to when they entered a port of entry so that their numbers didn't count. Is that accurate?
Right. So that's the other reason why they've been doing it since 2021 is because they put together these admissions programs outside of authority from Congress, which is illegal. You have to have Congress has to approve admissions programs. They just created these things. We're going to start flying people in. If you apply to come in on humanitarian parole for 2 years, temporary, we'll let you fly in, or we'll let you walk across the land port. Uh, 1.5 million, 1.7 million people they've let in that way, and they wanted to reduce the border crossings by deporting people for that. Go get in line for those things. So we're going to deport you, or we're going to put you back, but we're still going to let you in. We're just going to let you in a different way that where we don't have to count you as an illegal. So they're trying to like rechannel through these. Trump's going to cancel both of those programs immediately on day one. Those will not exist anymore. So then at that point, it becomes all about, deporting everybody that they can lay hands on. That's what it's going to be. They're going to have to track people down. It's going to take investigation. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be time consuming. But, there were a lot of programs put in place that will take quite a bit of unwinding, complicated untangling to get out of them. It might take a little bit of time as well. But the main thing that all those immigrants are worried about that I interviewed down there is the actual exact thing that they need to worry about, which is that if you reach our border and you spent 10 grand to get there, under Trump, the Border Patrol will catch you and put you right back in Mexico or on one of these flights. They'll put you in detention until they can get you on one of those flights. But you're not going to be allowed to claim asylum or any of this other stuff. They're just going to deport you. And as soon as the word of that spreads to the rest of the world, most of them are just going to stay home and wait for another Democrat to get in
Right.
office.
Do you feel that the Remain in Mexico policy could be re-implemented?
On day one, I do. I think it'll go in on day one. They need it. Very highly effective. For those of you uninitiated on that, it was the Trump era. And by the way, it's fully vetted in the courts all the way to the Supreme Court. It is ready to go. Nobody can sue on that again. It's done. The litigation is done and it's upheld. The average immigrant that's coming across is coming because they know that if they say, I want asylum or asylum, that they'll let them be released into the country for the years that it takes for their claim to go through, assuming that they ever even keep it. But Remain in Mexico takes that whole thing away. That whole benefit gets taken away because who wants to wait it out in Mexico? They didn't come to live for 5 years in Mexico.
Right.
Nobody's coming for the great Mexican dream. So as soon as the world finds out that you don't get to get released into the United States, you get to get released into Mexico. It's over, game over. They stay home. Nobody wants that.
It was effective before and it will be effective again.
Absolutely. And there's some other things that they can do too. I don't know if they will, that will just make it not worth the money and the effort. You're not going to get in.
One thing they could do that would help would be to defund the NGOs that are helping get these people here. Do you have any idea if that might happen?
Yeah, that's going to happen.
That's great.
I don't know how long it's going to take to unwind that thing, but the administration people that they're putting in right now and lots of members of Congress who hold the majorities now, or I don't know what, did they call the House yet?
The last I heard they had, and the Republicans won. I don't know the margin.
Yeah, they all know what the story is there, and there are bills that are written that are ready to go to defund the UN. I do believe we're going to see that in the next year.
That needs to happen in the worst way. The thing that people don't understand, they feel like these charitable organizations are there doing a service to help these migrants, and what they don't understand, and I'm just going to say the quiet part out loud, these NGOs are culpable and complicit in human and child sex trafficking, and that is a tragedy that has got to stop. And people think all of these NGOs are doing wonderful things to help the migrants. They're not. They are an arm of our federal government that is perpetuating a tragic situation.
Right. Well, there's a lot of sentiment that runs just like that. And, to a certain extent, it is, I think, beyond a challenge that those NGOs down there are, aiding and abetting the mass migration. They help them, they provide a safety net. A lot of people might not come if they didn't have a safety, especially with children. And a lot of the unaccompanied minors wouldn't be coming on their own if it wasn't for the safety net that from South America, the tip of South America, all the way to the Mexican border. They're all in all the way stations all the way through. I've been to them. I've recorded them. I've interviewed their workers. I've watched them operate, etc. And and I think a lot of people that have been elected resent it. So I think there's going to be backlash. I don't know if this is true. I'll just say, but I have a friend who's down there right now in South America who is now reporting that the NGOs and the UN have frozen all hiring and all spending. So that is interesting. That's very telling because that means that they think that they're out of business and they're going to save their bullets, preserve their funding. That I don't know if that's true. I'm going to look into it more.
I saw something about that. I don't remember who it was that reported it. I did read that last night, and I know the account you're referencing, but I cannot remember who it was.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I mean, I sure wouldn't doubt it. But that, they were investing heavily all the way up until the election. And I wrote a big story about that, about how they're putting all this money into these huge facilities. They were clearly betting on a Harris win. So if they're ceasing construction and they're freezing expenditures and hiring and all the rest of that now, I think that's because Trump
Right.
and they know what's coming.
I'm just going to say this part too. I think that this is a huge eye opener for the rest of the world because our mainstream media led everyone to believe that things were different than they really were. When we, the people, turned out in massive numbers in this country to actually get out the vote, we voted, and it was not what the mainstream media and the rest of the world expected. And now they're just kind of like sucking wind, going, what have we done? And the rest of the world sees it.
It was an upset. No question at all. I'll tell you, though, I stopped watching the polls about a month before the election, for whatever this is worth, and started watching the gambler handicappers, and turned out to be right. They were spot on about the election results. I'll just point that out. I mean, I'm not here to talk politics really, but wow, gambler handicappers.
Todd, the same thing happened in 2016. The bookies in Vegas called it well before the pollsters.
Yeah, and they call most of them actually. So I don't know. I think going forward, I'm not going to be paying attention to polls anymore. I mean, it's just what's the point? They're meaningless.
Well, they are. One thing is very clear. The mainstream media was significantly out of touch with the rest of America. The real grassroots voters, they're completely out of touch with the rest of America.
Yeah, they didn't get it. I mean, I'm speaking as I was a journalist for 23 years. I had a full career as a newspaper guy, big newspapers and big media companies, the whole thing. But so I know a little bit about this, but the fact that they demonstrated no influence at all this time shows that they actually have no influence anymore at all. The power of the media has now diffused to other smaller outlets and Facebook and whatever, your podcast and lots of podcasts like it. I think that's where it is now.
The problem the mainstream media has is a lack of integrity. When you spread lies and people find out about it, they quit watching you. Your viewership drops, your ad revenue drops, and you end up in the tank. I mean, that's just the way it works.
They were, yeah. Well, I think that they're busted now. I think there's no
Mhm.
question at all. Whatever protection they were running for the Harris campaign with friends like that, who needs enemies? you know.
That's a great way to look at it. So, what else would you like to add?
Listen, it's just going to be very, these are interesting times to live in, but we are going to be seeing a lot of action between now and January 20 about the border. There's a lot to watch for. They're putting together the transition team. They're putting together the cabinet. I like what I'm seeing so far
Mhm.
on the border security front.
Yes,
Um, Tom Homan and those guys know exactly what to do.
they
They know
do.
exactly what to do. These guys will have this thing in hand very quickly. So,
Yes. Okay. Well, I think that probably wraps it up for today, and I look forward to our next time back on.
all right. Thank you.
Thank you.